All right. So you guys ready for a little bit of story time? So yesterday I introduced you guys to this chart, and so we have problems that are caused by hubris, problems that are caused by fate and prophecy that can be avoided, and problems that are caused by some god through a hissy fit because a human was better than them. And then and most of the problems are caused by Zeus couldn't keep it in his pants. Well, this story is one of those that where Zeus couldn't keep it in his pants. And I don't know if, and by the way, up in the upper right hand corner, the I don't know if you've heard this about Zeus before, but he did it with everybody and everything. All right. So this definition as a horn dog is academic and accurate. All right. And then also, I want to introduce you to this title right here, The Rape of Europa. In classical art, the word rape does not necessarily mean a sexual assault. Most of the time, I want you to know that the word rape means a kidnapping, all right, or an abduction. Okay, so you don't have to read this, and I'm not going to read this to you, but I found this on the internet. It's a list of the sexual partners of Zeus, and it's a lot. But, and there's lots of memes of Zeus. Women in Greece minding their own business, and then along comes Zeus. To this day, the most unrealistic thing Disney ever did portray was to portray Zeus as a loving family man. Greek mythology in 5 words. Unfortunately, Zeus was feeling horny. And thing that can give birth, and Zeus gets excited. All right, so here we go. Another Greek myth about Zeus and a girl. So this Greek myth starts with a group of women. All right, and a group of women, and they are this one right here. All right, because in the next slide I identified her as Europa. So this one right here is Europa, and she and her maidens are hanging out by a field of cows. And meanwhile, up in the heavens, Zeus looks down, sees Europa, falls in love with her, and plans his trickery. So he disguises himself as a cow, and so she is hanging out with her friends, and she looks out at this field of cows, and then there's one cow that's kind of flirting with her, that's kind of acting different. It's kind of being silly and making her laugh and giggle. So she goes over to it. Then the cow dips his head and flips her onto his back and then charges out into the ocean. So let's see. The reason why he disguises himself as a cow is that his wife slash sister is Hera. And I showed you the list of all his other sexual conquests. She is constantly angry at him for cheating on her. And so he has to come up with disguises so that she doesn't find out about his escapades. So this time he disguises himself as a cow. He throws her onto his back and they go out into the ocean and they go and they swim and swim and swim, and then they go to the island of Crete down here. Once they get on Crete, they start having babies. And they have so many babies that it populates the island of Crete. So the island of Crete is populated by the children of Europa and Zeus. All right. Years later, one of their children becomes king, King Minos, and he's a good king. Everybody loves him, and he's fair, he's honest, and he's popular. And one of his most prized possessions is his favorite bull. It's the most beautiful bull that ever was. And Poseidon says, I want you to sacrifice the bull to me. But this bull is King Minos' favorite. So instead of sacrificing his favorite bull, he sacrifices his second favorite bull to Poseidon. And that really pisses off Poseidon. All right. Poseidon gets really angry. And he gets back at King Minos by making King Minos' wife fall in love with the bull. Right, that he wouldn't sacrifice. So his wife, and this is a very embarrassing for the king. His wife is now in love with his favorite bull. So the wife goes to Daedalus. This is a really messed up part of the myth, but she asks Daedalus to create a structure so she can do it with the bull. The union of that event creates the Minotaur. So, right, so the bull gets her pregnant. Later on, she gives birth to the Minotaur. This is extremely embarrassing for King Minos. So he creates this labyrinth. He has Daedalus create this labyrinth to hide the bull, the Minotaur. So he also imprisons Daedalus inside of this labyrinth. And the way that Daedalus escapes is that he builds wings out of feathers and wax, and he and his son escape. And in another myth of Daedalus and Icarus, he tells his son, "Hey, when we fly out over the ocean, you don't go too high or you don't go too low. You just go right in the middle. Just follow me, and we go out when we go out there." And when they start flying, his son, feels so free with the wings, he starts varying from the course of his father. He goes too low, and the ocean spray kind of strips some of the wax off of the wings. He goes too high, the sun melts the wax from the wings, and he falls into the ocean. And so, those of you that wear the Led Zeppelin shirt, that is the story of Daedalus and Icarus. All right. Now, I'm going to skip past this. Back to art history. On the island of Crete, there is this place called Knossos right here. And in 1900, an archaeologist discovers Knossos. Now, when you look at the plan of the building, it looks a lot like a maze. So, this guy, Arthur Evans, said, "Hey, I found the maze that the Minotaur was put on." So, homeboy over there found Troy. I found the maze. These people are really trying to find these places where the myths took place and to see if they're true or not. All right. However, it's been debunked that this is not the maze. It is, and it was also called a palace, and it is not a palace either. It is a trading center. But it's really complicated. I can see how somebody would think it is a maze. And also, there's a lot of confusing things about the architecture here, which is why he thought it was a maze. There are corridors that don't go anywhere. There are stairs that don't go anywhere, and it's a very confusing architecture. And what had happened was there had been a massive earthquake, and they rebuilt this palace, and they only partially rebuilt parts of it. So, yes, there are hallways that don't go anywhere. There are odd architectural things because it was repaired after the earthquake. All right. So, he claimed that he found the Minotaur's labyrinth, and art historians are saying, nope, it's not a mythological maze. It's just a really awesome palace. So, here are some artistic images of what this quote unquote palace would have looked like. And from the inside, all right, now, have you guys ever played Assassin's Creed? All right, the videos are there's a couple of videos, and inside this game of Assassin's Creed, they have a model of the Palace of Knossos, and it's a pretty cool walkthrough. And this video has an art historian talking about the specifics of this. So I highly recommend this video, but we don't have time for it right now. We're going to move on. All right, here's some images of the site, and there are parts like this right here. These are reconstructions that Arthur Evans created in the early 1900s. I want you to notice these columns have a very distinctive shape, and they were painted red, but they are thicker at the top than they are at the bottom. They almost look like they are upside down. And the other thing I want to point out is that Greece is a very hot place, and Crete is a very hot place. And one way that they used to cool off the palace or cool off this structure, this economic place, was to have these open areas where the heat on the inside of this open area would go up, drawing in air from the outside to come into the lower layers. So in the lower levels, there's large windows and openings where a breeze comes in, and then the heat goes out the top, which is a very clever way of cooling down a building because they didn't have air conditioning. All right, we're going to move on to painting. This is a quick video on how fresco is done. We've done fresco stucco, right? All right, this is buon fresco.
First, a rough layer of plaster, called the Aegean, is applied to the surface of the wall with a trowel. This plaster is composed of thick sand and lime, with a ratio of 1 part lime to 3 parts of inactive material, or thick sand. This layer is allowed to dry for 1 or 2 days before it's ready for the second layer. The thin, smooth second layer of plaster, called the MYTHOLOGY, is then applied, and this plaster is composed of lime and a finer inactive material, such as fine sand or marble dust. This last layer of plaster is the fine surface that serves to be giornata, or day's work, ready to accept the pigment. Artists during the Renaissance would have had a workshop, and therefore many apprentices would have all worked on a fresco commission together. First, the artist sketches the composition onto the animal skin glue for reference. The outlines are then poked with a needle to produce a series of holes that will allow pigment to pass through. The tracing paper with the image, or the cartoon, is then held to the surface, and a bag made with thin material filled with pigment is patted over the surface of the tracing paper, gently forcing the pigment to pass through the holes of the image, depositing them onto the surface of the fresco. Then, using a brush, they connect the dots to produce a basic line drawing of the artist's original composition. The next step is to use a pigment called...
I want to emphasize that while she's painting this while the plaster is wet. And that's the main difference between buon fresco and fresco stucco, right? Fresco stucco is where they're waiting till the plaster dries and then painting on top of that. And here they're painting it when it's wet. The paint goes into the wall, not just on the surface of it. We're going to move on. And so that creates this chemical bond between the wall and the paint. So what we're looking at is a fresco by the Minoans. This is the buon fresco. This is not fresco stucco. What we have here is just a few little fragments of the fresco. These little parts right here are the fresco. The rest of it is a reconstruction of what archaeologists, art historians, and artists think that it would have looked like if it was complete. But we're going to focus on this little lady right here. She's the La Parisienne. So they're calling her the Parisian because she looks so fancy. She's got eye makeup and lipstick on. She kind of pops out in art history as an interesting tidbit. But what I really want to talk about is this one right here, the Toreador fresco. And again, this is only a partial fresco. All these dark patches of the blue, that is the original fresco. The rest of it is, and then also the dark patches of the brown, or I think it might be this is the light patches of the brown, is the original fresco. The rest of this is a restoration of what they think it would have looked like. Now, the skin tones. I didn't talk about this with the Egyptians, but the same phenomenon happens with the Egyptian art as well as the Minoan art, whereas the females are seen in a lighter skin tone than the males. So we have on this Egyptian piece, the two females on the outside are lighter skinned than the two males on the inside. And here we have in the Toreador fresco, a female is grabbing the bull by the horns. Another female is on the right side, and it looks like she might be throwing this guy or catching this guy who is jumping over a bull. He's flipping over a bull. And that seems to be a pastime that they had at that time, a sort of entertainment where they would, instead of like a bullfight where you throw the swords or the spears into the bull, you get the bull to charge at you and you flip over it. And here I have a gif of, or a gif of, um, uh, the bull leaping. You can see that it seems to be still practiced. And for young men, this would have been a rite of passage to perform feats of agility and strength with the bulls. Also, the Minoan culture really worshipped bulls, and a lot of their artwork has to do with bulls. And I talked about how bulls are a symbol of strength and and a good harvest. All right, we're going to move on to this spring fresco. And this is unusual because nature is the subject. There is no narrative element. And we can even look to see this is very new to art to have just pictures on the wall that don't have people in it or animals in it, but just a pretty landscape. There are a couple of birds in this. And one of the things that's unique or typical of the Minoans is they have a lot of flowing rhythm in their artwork. And you can see that in the red lines that we put in there. It gives it a flowing composition. And then if we compare it to the Hall of the Bulls, it's quite different, whereas the Hall of the Bulls is put on by charcoal and ochre, and the fresco is done with the pigment on the wet plaster. But also, it is just nature on both of them, and neither one has a narrative element. But I want to move on. I'm going to really run through the art museum today. Are we good to go? Minoan pottery. All right. The potter's wheel was a new invention for the Minoans, and I don't know if you ever watched somebody create a pot, but they spin this wet clay on a spinning surface, and that allows you to create a a nice even circle or cylinder for the walls. We're going to take a look at this one on the left. And there's a lot of these swirling lines is a symbol of the sea, and this and these swirlings, these swirls there. And this right here is a fishnet. And this has a black background with light figures on it, whereas our next one is a light background with black figures on it. And I'm going to go into more detail about that when we get into the Greek art. But right now, I want you guys to know this one. This is I'm not a fan of pottery, but this one is one of my favorites. It just looks silly, and I like the octopus, and I like his waving arms. And the position of the octopus tentacles mirrors the shape of the jug. And also, I want you to notice there's a couple of registers here, but for the most part in Minoan pottery, there is a lack of registers in their pottery, which is unusual. If you go over to and look at these, there's very little of the register, especially this one up here. It's not unique, but specific to the Minoan culture that they have a lack of registers. All right, we're ready to move on. Minoan sculpture. We're going to look at a figure that comes from from the palace at Knossos, and this figure is about 1 foot tall. So we'll take a look at this snake goddess. Some art historians call her a snake goddess. Some say she's probably not a deity, but she could have been a real person or a priestess. She's holding two snakes, but she has a lion on her head. And I want you to notice this dress. The dress covers her arms, it covers her torso, it covers her legs, but the one part that is exposed is the breasts. And that's why a lot of people, a lot of art historians suggest that this is a fertility goddess. She is very frontal. We are meant to see her from the front. We see that in a lot of the frescoes, the style of the Minoan women, they wore a very tight fitting short sleeve bodice that was pulled tight under the breasts. The snakes represent her role between the worlds, her access to spiritual wisdom, and her power of transformation. And she seems to be inviting us to partake of these powers as she shows us the way. Here's a couple of fan arts about for Snake Goddess. And we can compare her to previous figures, previous female figures. Whereas the Egyptian right here, it's kind of ambiguous because here we see she's definitely wearing a dress, but then the top of her seems to be exposed, or possibly it's a very tight fitting dress up at the top. And the Mesopotamian figures right here, they have a dress, but one breast is exposed. And the Minoan women have the breasts exposed. So this idea of the exposed breast is common throughout cultures. I found some funny memes. This one makes me laugh because my daughters are 21 and 16, and when we go to a place like Target or whatever, it's very difficult to find them clothes that conform to the dress code of school. And old people's clothes are so tacky, and then Minoan old people's clothes. All right. Any questions about Minoan culture? We're going to move on to Mycenaean or Mycenae. Moving on, we're going to go to the mainland Greece, which is called Helladic art. Now, in Tiryns, there was this massive fortress, and I want you to know the term citadel. I had done an updated version of this slideshow and I couldn't find it this morning. So we're looking at a slightly older one. But I had turned that word citadel to green. So I want you to know what citadel is. It is a fortress. And look at the walls of this fortress. They are 20 feet thick, absolutely massive walls. There is no army that's going to get through those walls or penetrate those walls. And later ancient civilizations believed they could not believe that men had created these walls. They must have been built by the Cyclopes. You know what a Cyclops is? All right, it's a giant with one eye, very strong, very big, and so that's called Cyclopean masonry. Is and in my new slide show, I had better pictures of this. Anyways, this particular citadel, the one at Tiryns, a lot of art historians believed that it was the citadel of Agamemnon. Agamemnon was one of the kings and generals that fought at the Trojan War. He fought on the side of the Greeks against the Trojans, and there's a lot that believe that this is his palace. And we've got another Assassin's Creed video. And I do want you to know what a corbelled vault is. Vault is another term for a ceiling. Now, I taught you guys post and lintel. You should know what post and lintel means. It's two posts with a lintel across it. That's how you keep the ceiling up. They figured out another way to keep the ceiling up. So you take a stone and you put it one in a little bit, and the next one goes in a little bit more, and the next one goes in a little bit more, and eventually the stones meet at the top. The reason why this doesn't cave in is because the weight keeps the stones together. And you have this pointed ceiling called a corbelled vault. And that's what I want you to remember from this. All right, we're going to move to a nearby citadel. And the main gate is this right here. And as the enemy, if the enemy were to try to attack, the weakest point is the gate, and they would try to go in here. And look at the walls that are up around it. So the defenders of the citadel would stand up on the walls and throw down rocks and spears and arrows onto the enemy that would be coming in. But this particular gate is called the Lion's Gate, and it has these two lions. So you can see the corbel, or you can see the post and lintel, and then above it is a corbelled arch or a corbelled vault. And then in that empty triangular area right there, they have a sculpture of these two lions. Again, this is what it looks like in the Assassin's Creed game. Pretty cool. And these lions are meant to have the same kind of effect that the Lion Gate in Mesopotamia did, and that the Lamassu also had. They are meant to show strength of this citadel. They are meant to intimidate people that are visiting, and it's meant to show off how strong it is. And this right here is, it's called the heraldic pose, and it like almost like the pose of lions in a coat of arms, like they're standing up and they have their arms up like this and they're saying "rar." So these symmetrical and rearing lions and bulls, these are what they call heraldic poses. And so we're going to move to Mycenaean, and there is the treasure of Atreus. And this is a corbelled dome. This is built the same way that that corbelled vault was. So they do this circle of stones, and then the next circle of stones that's on top of that is slightly inward. And then the next one is slightly inward until it becomes a dome. This is the largest known vaulted space without supports in all of antiquity until we get to the Pantheon in Rome, which is 1,500 years later. So this is a marvel of engineering and architecture. There's this long entrance into the space, and it's called a treasure of Atreus, but it's not a treasury. It is actually a tomb, and that should be the treasury of Atreus. As you walk in, you can see the lintel that goes across, and then there's the corbelled space above it, the corbelled arch, the corbelled vault. This is it from the inside, and here's an illustration of what it would have looked like at the time. Again, this is the largest open space until the Pantheon in Rome. All right, we're going to move over and look at a couple of places or a couple of items from this location. Just to the south of the Lion's Gate, this is called Grave Circle A. And this is it's a tomb. And if you look at a side view of the tomb, the people are buried well below it. All right, this is the mask that we are looking for or looking at. The multiple gold masks were found in Grave Circle A, and it is the first attempt to render a face life size. And it's often called the Mask of Agamemnon, but Agamemnon lived 100 years after this mask was made, so it couldn't be Agamemnon. And it is made with a process called repoussé, where they hammer the gold sheet into shape. So they'll hammer it. You know, you've probably seen in movies there's a blacksmith and he has an anvil. Well, they are hammering it against the shape of the anvil to get a curve or to get a flat space. Do you guys need to see this a little bit longer? We're done with this slide. We can see the differences between the two. The King Tut's mask is infinitely more elaborate, whereas the funerary mask at Grave Circle A is quite simply a thin sheet of gold that has been hammered into the shape of a face. Most likely, it would have been on top of a dead person, and most likely a king or somebody of importance. And I want to point out this vase right here. This is going to lead us into Greek art. So the very early Greek art looks a lot like very late Mycenaean art. All right. Phew, that was quick. All right. Are there any questions? I went through a lot of that really super fast.